Hey guys, it's Will from Potato Strong. Just want to talk a little bit about sodium today. When I got into this lifestyle, there's a lot of people quite concerned about sodium. And when I went from like vegetarian or people that go from standard American diet to a plant-based diet, they're eating fruits and vegetables. They're naturally reducing their sodium by a huge amount. And a lot of the tests that are done, that show sodium can cause problems are usually used with people that are on the standard American diet, and that's the main problem. So I try to get people to focus on the big picture, which is removing the animal products and eating a whole food plant-based diet. Those types of foods have naturally low amounts of sodium, and if you put some in, if you salt to taste your food, or sometimes there's sodium in some of the bouillons or the sauces. You try to get some lower sodium versions, but not to get too worried about it. And there's actually some evidence that you don't want to go too low, and there's a balance between potassium and sodium, because we do definitely need sodium. So we don't want to demonize these things too much. I try to take just a level-headed approach, eating whole food, plant-based, and if there's some sodium in some of the additional things, then that's fine. I don't notice any, like, people talk about salt water retention or bloating and all this stuff from sodium. I have no sense of that happening. And a lot of times a little bit of sodium can definitely help in some cases. There's adjustment periods there when you get used to less sodium, but in some cases it's getting people to eat a lot more vegetables. And I think that's a good thing. So I got a clip here that Dr. McDougall posted recently where he chatted with a doctor who has had some opposing evidence to the usual idea that you should avoid salt and sodium. So I'll just post that next, and you can check that out. See it.
You've asked about salt. Salt does not seem to me to be the health issue that our medical community has turned it into. One dietary change that the medical community has been successful in bringing to the world, the general public, is to cut down on the salt. And as I looked at this and began to study it, I found evidence in the research that cutting the salt too low actually increases your mortality. So I encourage people to take the salt, and it's not so much the salt that's a problem, it's inadequate amounts of potassium. And the potassium-sodium balance ends up being really important here. Where do you get potassium in your diet? Well, it comes from fruits and vegetables. And so, break out those beans, they seem to be some of the highest in potassium. It's not just bananas, but almost everything has quite a bit of potassium if it's a whole plant food. You see, there's a problem with a low-sodium diet. It does three things. It increases insulin resistance. It activates the renin-angiotensin system, which is one of the most potent kind of causes of atherosclerosis, and increases vascular tone. I mean, this is kind of what we would expect to happen. Put these things together, the evidence is that there's increase in mortality when you get below around 2.5, maybe 3. Current recommendations are actually too low. It looks very safe up to about 6 grams of sodium a day. And as long as there's enough potassium present to reverse or negate salt sensitivity, it's really not a problem. So I say salt your food and don't worry about it. Now, if you happen to be eating a lot of salt fish, the Japanese type diet where they're eating a lot of salt with everything, a lot of pickles, a lot of salted food for preservation, then you see increased problems. But that's generally above about 6 grams a day. Average American is significantly less than that, although the males tend to be a little higher. And yes, it might be reasonable to cut down a little bit, but to go really low may cause a lot of trouble, especially for people on diuretics. I was surprised as I was reviewing for my presentation here that there's actually very good evidence. For example, congestive heart failure seems to do better without so much salt restriction. I was surprised with that. Diabetes, evidence that salt restriction tends to increase mortality. It's not just a blood pressure issue, it's a mortality issue. When you look at just blood pressure, it's a marker, it's not a disease, it's a symptom, it's not the cause. So when you look at all-cause mortality, it looks like salt restriction is actually dangerous, maybe even more dangerous than excess salt.